A UN-backed tribunal in Cambodia has rejected an appeal by the last surviving leader of the Khmer Rouge regime, upholding his convictions of genocide and crimes against humanity. 91-year-old Khieu Samphan's trial is set to be the last in a 16-year review of the brutalities of the regime in the 1970s. The body has spent more than $510 million investigating a reign of terror that left more than 1.7 million people dead. Joining us now from Perth is Dr Melanie O'Brien, an Associate Professor of International Law at the University of Western Australia's Law School. She is also the President of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Thank you very much for your time. Firstly, could you begin by telling us about Khieu Samphan? Who is he? What was his role within the Khmer Rouge government? And what were his crimes?
Khieu Samphan was one of the leaders of the Khmer Rouge. So he was actually served as president of Democratic Kampuchea, which is what Cambodia was known as in the 1970s. And he was also known as Brother Number 4. So I think we all know that Pol Pot was the leader and he was known as Brother Number 1. So telling you that Khieu Samphan was Brother Number 4 obviously demonstrates that he was quite high up in the leadership. He was convicted by the extraordinary chambers in the Courts of Cambodia in the trial judgment of a wide variety of crimes against humanity and also genocide against ethnic and national minorities in Cambodia.
Is it the case that the genocide conviction against him relates to just one ethnic group?
So he was convicted of genocide against a number of different groups. So the Vietnamese as a national and ethnic group, but also religious minority groups such as the Cham Muslims. And this has been one of the controversies about the judgment, that there was only prosecution for genocide against ethnic and national minorities, and there wasn't a prosecution for genocide against the majority Khmer population. So that's something that has generated a lot of discussion amongst scholars and practitioners in the area, and the debate around, whether or not genocide was actually committed against the majority population, which many of us argue was indeed the case.
And so how do Cambodians view this? Are survivors of the regime likely to believe that justice has been delivered?
The survivors do refer to it as genocide as well. So in their eyes, what took place was genocide. And my research certainly demonstrates that what took place against the Khmer people was genocide, that there was an intent to destroy the Khmer people in whole or in part, at least, definitely. And this is demonstrated through the atrocities that were committed, through the number of people that were murdered or who died through starvation and overwork. So they did have policies of forced marriage, the supposed intent of which was to increase the population of Cambodia. So it seems quite ironic, but if you actually look at what they carried out, instead, in fact, as you mentioned, 1.7 million people died instead of increasing the population.
Why has it taken so long to bring this proceeding to an end, some 40 years after these war crimes and other atrocities were committed?
This is a really important question, and it took a really long time to even establish this court. It was the late 90s when they started discussing it, and it didn't actually come into being until 2006. So it took a really long time, and a lot of that has to do with the political situation in Cambodia, because the Khmer Rouge essentially remained in power. Even though the Vietnamese came in 1979 and overturned them, the Khmer Rouge still existed in Cambodia. And in fact, they continued to represent Cambodia at the UN for some time afterwards. And eventually, after the United Nations sent in a transitional peacekeeping operation in the 90s, known as UNTAC, the Transitional Authority in Cambodia, it was only then that there was a governmental transition. However, what we saw at that time was that members of the Khmer Rouge transitioned into the government. So we do know that there are, former members of the Khmer Rouge who remain in the Cambodian government today. And what emerged from that is this desire to protect those people. And so the government didn't want to see any of those people put before the tribunal. So there was a lot of to and froing about what the tribunal would look like, how it would be composed, and most importantly, who it would put on trial. And so that's probably the main reason why we've seen such a delay. And that political issue has continued to plague these extraordinary chambers in the Courts of Cambodia throughout its 15-year history in which it has been operating. It has received a lot of pushback from the Cambodian government specifically for this reason.
Just finally, are there implications for other prosecutions currently underway as a result of this genocide conviction in other areas?
One of the significant findings that came out of this ruling today was related to the crime of forced marriage, and this has been a challenging crime for all courts to actually prosecute because none of the international courts and tribunals have the crime of forced marriage in their statute. So what they've done is they've used what we call a residual crime, sort of an umbrella leftover crime, which is called other inhumane acts as a crime against humanity. And what the appeal has done is confirm that forced marriage is indeed another inhumane act under a crime against humanity. So this is quite important because we do have the Dominic Ongwen appeal coming up in the International Criminal Court, and we also have other cases coming from Mali in the International Criminal Court which deal with forced marriage. So this is particularly important when it comes to future cases coming out of the International Criminal Court related to forced marriage.
Dr. Melanie O'Brien, the President of the International Association of Genocide Scholars and an Associate Professor of International Law at the University of WA, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.